Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Holly, and I'm an alcoholic. I have been from one end of this United States to the other, backwards and forwards. In many places, I have been received very nicely. Many other places, I have been received very richly. But in this valley that lies in the palm of Almighty God, I have been received and treated royally. But of course, somewhere in the scripture it says we are a peculiar people. And tonight, I'm very grateful. I'm extremely grateful. But before I bring you the message, I've got a message. Now, this doesn't pertain to everybody. Those that are guilty will know it. Those that are not don't have to pay attention to it. The message is this. I would like a certain Hugh D to stop picking on a certain Jim B. I feel that this has gone far enough, and I mean you. He's supposed to write and tell me if you do this again. Oh, I'm not going to stand here tonight and give you a blow-by-blow description of my drinking. Everybody knows how to get drunk. All you've got to do is open your mouth and swallow it. You get drunk. See, our book tells us that our stories reveal in a general way what we used to be like and what happened and what we're like now. So if I was going to stand here and tell you what I used to be like, I'll miss my plane tomorrow, so I'm not going to do that. Everybody knows, at least I do, how it wakes up, or how it feels, rather, to wake up and look at the clock, and the clock says 6. And you don't know what 6 it is. Whether it's AM or PM, because it's twilight, and you're in the twilight zone, you know, one of those kind of things. And you wish somebody would get up and fry some bacon or do something to let you know what 6 it was. And you'd like to get up and go and get a drink of water, but somebody will say, well, oh, are you up so soon? Or you'd like to just get up and go to the bathroom, and they're going to ask you the same question. So you lay there and suffer at both ends. Sure you're aware of that. I had a watch that stayed in the pawn shop so much that it wouldn't run on a Jewish holiday. See, I am so glad. See, now I live in a town that they don't have pawn shops in, and I don't drink. So that takes care of that. But I like to go back a bit to the first drink that I ever had. See, it's true, we can always remember that first drink. Most of us can. I can. Happened when I was about 14 years old, I believe. My grandfather, incidentally, I was born and raised in a very small town in Ohio, where people peeped out from behind the curtains at one another and said, "She did it again." But I wasn't doing it then, but I was fixing to. This grandfather of mine, who was supposed to be a teetotaler, he had a bottle of whiskey that he ruined horribly by putting a lot of rock candy in it and herbs and junk. And ever so often he would go he'd cripple in the room. He had arthritis very badly. And he would cripple in there to that room, and he'd pull open the drawer, and he'd get out this bottle, and he'd take out 2-3 swigs of it, and he'd sit there, and he would rub his leg for a while, and then he would get up and walk away. Say, I watched him do this several times, and one day I switched in there, and, I could walk beautifully. I switched in there, and I took a couple of swigs, and I took a couple of more, and I crippled away. But from there on in, I was in. You know, lots of times we like to say, you got in with the wrong bunch, or it was peer pressure, or one of those things. I was the wrong bunch, friends. I started this. So this thing went on, it gave me a feeling. You see, I always felt because I was an orphan, I always felt very insecure, very, shall we say, insignificant, very in everything. I was thinking the other day, I said, now, Holly, supposing through the grace of, had it not been for the grace of God, you see, I could really cry real tears about being an orphan. I said, now, if you were still drinking, wouldn't that be a mess at your age to be crying because you was an orphan? Hell, you're supposed to be an orphan when you get old as you are. If something's wrong with somebody. But nevertheless, that first drink that I remember so well, all of a sudden it didn't matter about my being an orphan. It didn't matter about my being anything because I was somebody. All that fear, I'm not going to go into a whole rigmarole about this fear because we all know about it. I was wondering at that time, this horrible fear that I had at this particular time, I wonder where it came from. I couldn't lose anything else. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. My mother and father, I had, as I told you, they were deceased, but that fear remained, and it seemed as I would ease in there and I would get this bottle out of the drawer, it seemed that as far as having parents or anything else, it just didn't matter. Oh, you might say, well, you were very well loved by your grandparents. Oh, no, I was tolerated by my grandparents, and I don't blame them for it, because had I been in their place, I wouldn't have tolerated me either. But the very simple reason is, I cannot remember, in other words, this is the only organization in my life, the only anything that I've ever been in that I didn't get put out of. You'd better believe it. When I was in school, I was constantly being expelled, one of those kind of things. When I went to church, well, I got excommunicated, and that sort of thing. Well, that happened a little bit later. We won't go into that right now. But finally, the day came when I said, you're going to be extinguished if you don't do something, one way or the other. But, it took me a long time before I came to that type of reasoning. It took a matter of 20-some years, and I'm not going to tell you how many of those 20-some years, because you start on your fingers right now, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'm 2 days older than Rain, so forget it, That's right, see. I'm old enough to know better. But nevertheless, as time went on, I would think now, I never heard the word alcoholic. You'd always hear about a drunk. But you never heard the word alcoholic. At least I didn't when I was a young lady. If you want to call me a young lady, I didn't hear about the word alcoholic. I always heard the word drunk, And, as I grew older, I wondered what was the difference between a drunk and an alcoholic. Well, there's a lot of difference between a drunk and an alcoholic. You see, if an alcoholic should go somewhere and he spills some lemonade on his clothes, that isn't lemonade, of course. He wets his clothes. He's going to turn his pants around and he's going to tell you it's lemonade. He's going to say, I was over to Millie's the other day, and he's not going to tell you I wet my clothes. He's going to say, I was over to Millie's the other day, and I spilled that lemonade on my pants, and I can't seem to get it off, See, now, a drunk isn't going to do that. He's going to tell you I peed on myself. What the hell are you going to do about it? That's drunk. See, a drunk doesn't give a damn, but an alcoholic gives too much of a damn, because we are very, very conscientious, very overly sensitive people. And I thought for quite some time when I was growing up, no one in my family drinks. But that was a lie. As I grew older, I found out there was a whole lot of them in there drank, but they didn't do it the way I did it. They just got drunk and died, and that was all there was to it, and those kind of things. They didn't have to go through all of the things that I had to go through with for about 20 years or more. But always within my mind, I always wanted to be able, like most alcoholics, to drink and not get drunk. Oh, I would pray that I could drink and not get drunk. And at that particular time, I did everything that I was told to do. I had a dear old friend at that time, and she would constantly tell me how I could drink and not get drunk. She'd say, now, darling, tonight, she loved to take me with her because, when you go into a bar, the old doll always likes to take a young doll along with her so that people will buy drinks. You see, I know about that because I've played on both leagues, And so she would take me along with her, and she would say, now, tonight, darling, when we go out, if you'll just take a little olive oil, and you drink a little olive oil before we go out, you won't get drunk. The only difference between my drinking a little olive oil and not drinking a little olive oil, when I drank it, I became a long, tall, greasy puking drunk instead of drunk, you know. And then I would try to explain to her about these hangovers that I had, you know. And she had an antidote for the hangover. She would say to me, now, darling, if you do not want to have a hangover, all you have to do is to get you a bottle of beer. Now, you open this beer, and you set it down beside the bed, and you let it get flat, and you drink it first thing in the morning. Well, I don't know whether that helps or not. There's no way in hell I could go to bed with a full bottle of beer down beside it. Maybe it works and maybe it don't. I don't know. So this sort of thing went on and on. And really, friends, I would try, you know, from time to time I would try. If someone would say to me, and I do very distinctly remember someone saying to me, you know, Holly, you do love flowers. Why don't you cultivate your flower garden? Well, I figured, well, maybe that's an idea. They didn't say don't drink. They just said cultivate your flower garden, you know, one of those kind of things. By this time, my drinking had increased, and I'm not going to call myself a wino, because women are not winos, they're winettes. And I used to go out every day, and but I always took my bottle with me, and I would go out there and I would pick the weeds around my flowers, you know. But I always took that bottle with me. And one day, a horrible thing happened. This was a hell of a catastrophe. I knocked this bottle over, so I decided I would dig a hole in the ground and stick the bottle down on the ground and put a couple straws down in there, and then you wouldn't knock the bottle over. Don't ever drink wine out of straws. I mean, well, don't drink, period, but don't drink it out of straws if you must. One day, I went out there to look at my flower garden, and there were more straws sticking up out of the ground than there was petunias. I had planted bottles all over there. Then somebody gave me the brilliant idea. Say, well, you know, dear, what you need is companionship. Oh, brother, that does it, you know. Somebody was always telling me what I needed, you know. So I thought, well, maybe that is a good idea. Maybe I should have. Well, I had companionship, but they was telling me, you know, that, shall we say, that blissful type of companionship. Well, I tried that, but marriage are like vaccinations on me. They just don't take or something or other. I don't know. And that didn't last too long because he was throwing it away faster. He was a gambler, and he was throwing it away faster than I could drink it up, and so I had to get rid of him. That didn't work too well. But now I had, over the course of years, I had 2 children. And oh boy, that was the love of my life. You know, had I been coming along in this time, I would do like the young people do today. I'd just had the 2 kids and got it over with. And wouldn't go through all those other rigmaroles that some people go through with. Which is nice if you can get the rigmarole to stop rigging, but mine never did stop rigging or roaring one way or the other. But you know, this gave me the perfect excuse to drink. I don't know whether anybody in this room is old enough to remember that serial that used to come on over the radio called The Poor Widow, whatever her name was, and 2 fatherless children to support. Oh, you should have heard about poor widow Martin and her 2 fatherless children to support. I had a tearjerker. I mean, it was a beaut. And all the reason in the world is drink. But every once in a while, that period would come back to me. Brief as it may be, one of these days you will drink and you will be a lady and you will not get drunk. That period never did happen. I tried. People would say, well, you know, if you're having a problem, pray about it. Well, I had a sneaky way of praying. You know, I used to pray to the saints and tell them, don't tell God I told them that, you know, one of those kind of things. So I was always doing some kind of praying. I'll tell you this very briefly about these promises that we make to ourselves. I'll tell you very, very briefly about that kind of praying until you get really and truly sincere about it, you know. This business of feeling, you know, that I'm going to con God even about it, or I'm going to con the angels, saints, and everybody else, well, that's the kind of conning I'm going to do. I remember one time, have you ever had that feeling that that you hear the call of the wild goose and you got to go where the wild goose goes? That's the day that you wake up and you say, I'm not going to get drunk today, but you hear the call of the wild goose. Well, at this particular time, we had the first 4 black nuns in the state of Michigan, and we had a little 3-room school out there. Lovely little parish. And at this particular day, everybody was going down there to celebrate. And it's just like people in AA, you know, those that do the least do the most celebrating, you know, that sort of thing. You know, we still do that. So I decided this day that I was going down there to the school where the little school had been built, you know, and all that sort of thing. And I'm going to celebrate, but I'm not going to take a drink. I mean that. I'm not going to get drunk, put it that way. So when I get down there, Mother Superior said to me, I said to her first, I said, Mother, is there anything you'd like to have me do? And she said, oh, child, go and enjoy yourself. When I want you, I'll send for you. Never tell a practicing alcoholic to go and enjoy himself. That's the worst thing you can do. So I went around to the caretaker's house, and he had a bottle of wine sitting there on the table, and was that, you know, sissy kind of wine, you know, Morgan David or some kind of jive like that. And everybody, you know, was drinking out of those little insult glasses about like that, you know. And, you know, how you do, like when you are, shall we say, just congratulating everybody on their good work. And I reached up and I got me a gratitude glass, and I poured a drink. And pretty soon the wine ran out, and I asked them wouldn't they like to have me go and get another bottle. And I got 2 bottles, that sissy kind that they have, and my kind, 20%, you know. Mad Dog or whatever you call it. So by then, dear Mother Superior wants me to go and work over to the wishing well. She should have never have done that. The woman shouldn't have. So on the way over there, now I think maybe if I have just a little bit of something to eat, maybe I won't, you know, be drunk. So on the way over there, one of our neighbors was, parishioners there, was making barbecue. And I thought, now if I can just eat a piece of this, you know, I'll straighten out. But he wasn't giving it to me as fast as I thought he should. You know how impatient we people are. So I took the phone and I reached it down into the sauce, about up to there. And he said, so another parishioner was standing there, and she said, Holly Martin, you can't do that. Well, now they tell me, I don't know. They said I did it. I probably did. I guess I did. They said I took the bone and I hit the lady with it. One of those kind of things. And here come the nuns running out and everybody else. And when I got through waving that bone around there, you'd think you'd been killing roaches or bed bugs with all the spots over everybody. Now, I felt terrible about this. Oh, really, I did. I felt horrible. And I decided that maybe I'd better leave, you know. Well, there's nothing else was left on the ground but me and 2 balloons. Everybody else took cover. When I got home, there was a large picture in my living room of our divine Lord. Now, these are the promises you make. I said, dear God, if ever again in my life I take a drink of alcohol, knock me dead. You know, I meant that with all my heart. And I said it when I looked at that picture and I said that prayer, dear God, if ever again in my life, just knock me dead. Well, you know, the next day, a couple of the nuns came down at Father's request. He wanted to see me. I tried to send him a note and apologize, but he wouldn't accept that. You know how some priests are, you know. So that's present company accepted. I'll do it every time. I don't know. Well, nevertheless, he didn't. And it was a beautiful sunshiny day, and here these 2 nuns come down the street, and they said, Holly, Father would like to talk with you. I said, I sent him a note, didn't he get it? And he said, that's okay, come on. Everybody come out on the street. They came out of the grocery store, the beer garden, the pool room. What's Martin done now? So here I go like a convict. I said, sister, can't we go down the alley? She said, dear, you didn't get drunk in the alley, no. So we get up there. So Father is fresh out of pledges that day. So he said to me, Holly, you and I are going to have a gentleman's agreement. I said, anything he said then was all right, you know. He said, I want you to promise me you will never take another drink until you see me take a woman in my house. To this I readily agreed. But on the way home, I got to thinking about this. I said, I can't hang around here and watch and see what this man does, you know. Forgive me, Father. So I thought I'd better, get a little beer and think it over, So, I got the 2 jumbos there, and when I went home, and I looked at the picture on the wall, and I said, God, I didn't mean beer, So I drank the beer. And the next day, I'm not drinking no wine now. So the next day, I figure, well, beer is a horrible thing to drink when it's beer. It's like when somebody gives you tea when you want coffee or something like that. So then I decided I'd get a little whiskey, and I drank some of that, and I said, well, God, I didn't mean whiskey. The next thing you know, my friends, I was right back on wine again, and I looked at the picture, and I said, God, just forget it, I can't make it. But I was trying to drink and not get drunk. This is an impossibility for people like me. So this still goes on and on, but now let's get to the part where something happened. Finally, that day came, as all days will come in your life. You'd better believe it. If any of you have ever read The Hound of Heaven, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Because if he wants you, he's going to get you. That's for sure. This particular night, it was on a Saturday night, and that's the reason why I'm always feel very grateful whenever I'm asked to speak on Saturday night, because this was the beginning, my friends, of a miracle. This particular Saturday night, I happened to be at home, and this was a miracle within itself, that I was home. And as I sat there, I was listening to the radio. Now, I did not turn the radio on to this station, because when you're in my condition, you don't turn radios on and off. You buy one, and it plays, and you hear voices all the time anyway, so it gives out. So this story came on over the radio. It was called The Glass Crutch. And it was about a woman that had a drinking problem. Now, if it had been about a man, I wouldn't have paid any attention to it. All the men I knew had problems, so I wouldn't pay any attention to this. But nevertheless, it was about a woman that had a drinking problem, and to this day, I cannot remember any of the ingredients of the story. All I know, it was about a woman that had a drinking problem, and she said, if you ever need our number, it'll be the first number in the book. Do you know, it was 6 or 7 years before I ever attempted to call that number. But I'm going to tell you something. That's why I told you about the Hound of Heaven. All during these years, this did not happen to me every day, every month, or every week, or anything like that. But at certain intervals, I could be walking down the street, and it seemed as if my heel place would beat out the words, the glass crutch, the glass crutch. I can remember sitting at home, and the clock did not say tick-tock. It said the glass crutch, the glass crutch. This happened, my friends. Finally, one day I was sitting in the living room trying to read the newspaper, and it seemed as if every word on that newspaper said the glass crutch. And I said, my God, what does this mean? And it dawned on me. You see, all of this time, the words the glass crutch didn't mean anything to me. I couldn't figure out what it meant. I knew it meant something, but what, I didn't know. My eyes left the newspaper and fell on my hand, and I said, this is the glass crutch. Now, it would sound dramatic to say I dropped the glass paper and all that sort of thing and ran to the phone and called the number. I did no such thing. If there's anything wrong with Holly, I can straighten it out. The next day, I'm there again. And this time, there it was. I looked in the book. I was hoping it wouldn't be in there, but it was. Right there, the first number in the book. And I called the lady, and I told her I had a friend out there that I thought was losing her mind, and would she send somebody out to see about her? The lady said, would you like to have somebody see about you? No. Finally, I called back again, and she said, we'll have someone call you shortly, which the lady did. She called me very shortly, and she said to me, I hear you need some help with your drinking. I thought, I didn't need any help with my drink. I can drink it all by myself. She said, well, if you've got anything out there to drink, get rid of it. I did. I drank it up. And she said she's coming to see me. Now, by this time, I had reached the stage of zombieism. That is, if you drink, you don't get drunk, and if you don't drink, you don't get sober. You know, zombie-like. But alcohol is everything that big book says it is: cunning, baffling, and powerful. Do you know that about 45 minutes before time for that lady to come out and take me to that first meeting, a couple of lush-head buddies of mine came by, and they gave me a couple of drinks. And it was the same as pouring coal oil on the dying embers. I got drunk, you know. But when that lady did come, she said something to me that I shall never forget the longest day I live. I said, you know, I've got to do something because I've got 2 children. And I don't like those children seeing me drunk. I've got to do something on their account. And this woman looked at me and she said, you have got to do something on your account. You've got to do something for you. And my friends, that is the total message right there. You've got to do something for you, about you. Everything else will fall in place or fall out of place one way or the other. But it is first things first, and I was the first thing. Well, I go to that meeting that night, and when I got there, you know, 3 other women jumped up and said, we'll help you with her. They thought this was going to get to be my pallbearers. I look so bad or something, you know. But nevertheless, this sponsor I had, oh my goodness. Have you ever in all of your life ever called, you needed help so bad, and then after you get it, you say, now what in the hell did I do that for? You know. And I felt about my sponsor like a lot of men feel about their wives. I wish you'd go the hell away from me and leave me alone, but don't go so far I can't find you if I need you, you know, those kind of things. But she was constantly pulling out this who me on me. And she would say, just say yes to 3, dear, and you're in. And I thought the old biddy was getting about 50 cents a yes or something, you know. And I thought those questions were the silliest things you could ask anybody. Is drinking clouding your reputation? She'd look at me, and she had buck teeth, and she'd grit them, and I was scared she's going to bite me, so I had to answer something. Is drinking clouding your reputation? I'd say, well, now, if you've been in a fog over 20 years, how do you know whether it's cloudy or not, you know? Do you seek a lower environment while drinking? No, I merely created a lower environment while drinking. And then she asked one of the dumbest questions you can ask a practicing alcoholic. Do you prefer to drink alone? If I'm buying it, yes. If you're buying it, no. But do you know, something happened there. I continued to go. See, we sponsored a little bit different in those days than they do now. Nobody called up and said, would you like to go to a meeting tonight? They'd say, okay, get it together, I'll be by for you, and that was it, you know. So, and away you went. And you better not sit up and go to sleep because they'll kick you on the shins and do all that sort of thing, you know. And and then we didn't have paper cups. We drank out of heavy mugs in this group that I first belonged to. And when you'd start lying, you know, they'd start stirring in these cups, and you'd go to crying. And you'd say, oh, don't you believe me? And they'd say to you, and keep on stirring. Oh, brother, you talking about indoctrinators. You really got indoctrinated from way back. But them were some beautiful old gals, you know. Even today, you still want to sponsor that way. Even today, you still need to sponsor that way. If people will just shut up long enough to quit and tell you their problems instead of telling you about, but my therapist said, the hell with what your therapist said, it's what we say, you know. You don't hear that all the time, you know. So, it was gut level. Not what somebody else said about you, but I want to know what you've got to say about you. Don't become telling me about what somebody else had to say. I want to know how you feel about it, you know. Of course, I'm not too popular in my group. I'm only known as the big book bitch, so... But every time they get in trouble, here they come, you know. And I draw out the book, you know. So as time went on there, and things began to level off. They really and truly did. You know, you talking about tough love, that is exactly what I got. But you see, something happened here. See, something had been told to me. Sometimes we say things to children that we shouldn't say. And it stays in a child's mind. See, my father had been killed in the First World War, so the government naturally was taking care of me and I was growing up in my grandparents' home. I wasn't raised. I wouldn't let anybody raise me. And I remember my grandfather saying to me one time, which wasn't a very kind thing for a grandfather, to say to his granddaughter. But then I've long ago forgiven him because I don't blame him. I wasn't a very nice little girl. He said, if it wasn't for that money, we wouldn't have you on the place. So that stayed with me, my friends, and I did not get that out of me until I came into AA, to you people, to know that I do not need to have any money. I do not need to have anything to offer but me, and you will love me, not because of me, but in spite of me. You see, I grew up thinking that I have got to have something material to give you, and all you wanted was me. See, I couldn't believe this. When people would start calling me on the phone, and I said, well, what do you want? And they say, I just want to see how you feel. I said, that son of so-and-so's up to something. Couldn't believe it, I really and truly couldn't believe that people could love me for me. It's hard for me to believe it today, but they do, They love me in spite of me. And they loved me, and I learned to love them. And it took a lot of doing. And when they begin to tell me, you don't have to like him, you just got to love him. And I said, you mean I gotta love him? Yeah, you gotta love him too. I said, all right. It's pretty hard nut to crack, but I'll try. And it works. As time went on, I began to think, and we were step people. We still are. We're going to talk about those steps, because that is where it is. And today, my friends, when I think of those steps, many times, I think of them in many ways, but tonight I want to tell you about how I think of them in comparison to a story I heard one time about a little boy that was born a hopeless cripple. A hopeless cripple. His father had done everything that he could possibly do for this youngster. All to no avail. The child was still in a wheelchair. And one day, when his father was down in old Mexico, he ran into an old Indian chief down there that was selling moccasins. And he decided to buy a pair of moccasins for his hopelessly crippled child. And the old Indian chief told him, as he purchased the moccasins, he said, there is a legend that goes along with these moccasins. It's called the legend of the white butterfly. That whoever wears these moccasins, if there is anything wrong with this person, any ailment, any infirmity, while he is wearing them, if he will simply capture a white butterfly and press the wings of the butterfly to his infirmity, he will get well. Well, the good merchant, the good father, bought the moccasins, but he thought there's no need to tell my child this story because he's been crippled all of his life. But when he got home and he presented the moccasins to the youngster, just as an aftermath, he thought, well, I'll tell him the legend of the white butterfly. But you see, when the father told his son this beautiful story about capturing a white butterfly, hope was born. See, when you and I tell one another things, many times hope is born when we share with people. Each day this child would get up and he would go down into his father's flower garden in his wheelchair and try to capture a white butterfly, but all to no avail. You cannot capture one in a wheelchair. Always the butterfly would elude him. Then one day he asked his father for a pair of braces, and the father gave him the braces. Now these are very heavy, clumsy things, but the child went down there anyway. And he tried, but he couldn't. Always the butterfly would elude him because the child moved too slowly with these heavy braces on. Finally, he asked his father for a pair of crutches. And down he went, day after day. And he tried, but he couldn't capture the white butterfly because he was holding on to two crutches. And then one day he went down there and he had a cane. He asked his father for this cane, and the good father gave him the cane. And as he reached out, as a butterfly flew near him, he captured that butterfly, and the cane fell from under his arm. Now, you and I know very well that the white butterfly was not the cause of him being on the road to recovery. But what really did happen was this. See, all along, his good father had every kind of therapist come in the world that he could think of, that money could afford. And constantly, his muscles was massaged. He began to use muscles that were constantly being massaged. And you see, this is what had happened to me. I was massaging everything, never exercising anything. The first muscle that this child had to use was the muscle of honesty. Do you really want to get well? Do you want to get well for yourself? Like my sponsor told me, you must do this for yourself. Have you ever told a lie for so long you believed it yourself? Did you ever do that? You know. Well, that had happened to me. You know, I wanted to get well, but did I really want to? No. So when this youngster, that was the first muscle that he had to use, was that he wanted to get well for himself, not for anybody else. Because once I start on the road to recovery, or I cop the kind of plea that I'm going to do this for somebody else, it's not going to work. It just simply doesn't work that well. Because if I promise someone I'll stay sober for you if you will do such and such a thing, a compromise. Oh, no. No compromise. If I start taking credit for it, I've lost it. Say that I say to myself, probably I say to myself, well, look, I can do it all by myself. And I get that praise, and I get back what I thought that I wanted. Do you know, one day, 2 geese were flying along. They were on their way south. The weather was getting cold. And the frog asked him, he said, can I go with you? And the geese told the frog, he says, you can't fly. How are you going to go south with us? You can't fly. And the frog begged so pitifully, oh, please let me go. So the geese, they found a long stalk of cornstalk there, and one of the geese said to the other one, says, you put one end in your mouth, and I'll put the other end in my mouth. And he said to the frog, now you hold on between with your mouth and keep your mouth shut. Just hold on and you can go with us. So away they started. And they flew for a day or so, and 2 hunters happened to look up, and they saw this apparition flying through the air. And one said to the other, he said, isn't that a marvelous thing? Look, those 2 geese are flying south, and the frog is hanging on in the middle. Isn't that wonderful? He said, I wonder who thought of that. And the old frog said, I did. You know what happened? He got what he wanted, but he lost what he had. And generally, that is what happens. If I think that I'm going to do this for any other person other than me, or for any other gain other than me, I may get what I want, but I'll lose what I got. That's why, sometimes, we kind of tell you, kind of keep your mouth shut and just listen, Don't start taking too much credit for anything. And then this youngster, he had to realize they had to keep an open mind. Our second step came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity. I love that step, because I thought everybody was insane but me, He had to be able to accept help outside of himself. And that sometimes is very hard for us to do, for people like me. Being restored to sanity, many times we don't want to be restored to sanity, because, being restored to sanity means that I have to accept some responsibility. And as long as you're playing crazy, nobody's going to ask you to do anything. It's, oh, don't ask so-and-so doing, he's crazier than hell, But when one is being restored to sanity, he must. I know you're going to tell me, oh, there's no must in the big book. Well, then you must read the big book, because there's plenty of them in there. So, I used to hear that so much, There's no must in the big book. Well, then you must read it. There's plenty of them there, So I know I must be able to accept responsibility. And many times new people don't want to accept the second step, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity, because right away they think, oh, you're talking about religion, and I don't want to hear anything that has to do with religion. I heard a lady say one time, she had been to such a gathering as this, and she was not an alcoholic, and she'd heard many people, it was open participation, something like a marathon, get up, and she called it testifying, and she says, I can't understand how you people, after you've lived like that, she's one of them good old rock-bottom Christians, never done nothing wrong in her life, I can't understand how you people can stand up and testify like that. And she kept it up. She just kept talking about it. I said, she says, you must have went down awful low to be brought up so high, she says, and to be able, she says, to testify. How do you get it together, people that have lived like that? I said, lady, if you'd ever come where some of us come from, you'd be about a testifying ass. I said, you'd be testifying, all right, so. I said, you would testify. And we're going to find many people that sometimes don't understand us, that will make all kinds of remarks, but that doesn't make anything. That doesn't have anything to do with the way you and I feel about this, because we know in our hearts how we feel. I remembered another occasion. This gentleman says, I can't talk, but I can sing. And he felt so good that night that he got up to sing, and he sang, you saw me crying in the chapel. Well, some pedestrian had to make a remark about that. You mean to tell me after living like that you can stand up and saying you saw me crying in the chapel? And she went on and on. I said, lady, it is much better to stand up and sing you saw me crying in the chapel than to get arrested for pissing in the alley. I think it's wonderful, So you see, however one wants to express himself when he or she feels that he is being restored to sanity. See, there are many things that can steal our sanity. People, places, and things can steal my sanity. But only God can restore me to sanity. And that is why this child, he had to keep an open mind, because he did not know from where his help would come from. Many times when we come into this fellowship and have little or no belief, we don't know where our help is going to come from, where someone's going to open the door for us. And then he had to use the muscle of willingness, Because the big book tells us, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, see. And this youngster, somewhere in his mind, he knew that if he wanted to get well, he would have to use that muscle of willingness. And sometimes, when we look at that third step where we make this decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him, will and life over to the care of God. See, I realize when I take this step every day, not once a day, but all during the day. See, I have sat here and I have idolized your mountains. I just love them. And I look up at those mountains as I look out my window, and the psalm comes to me as David said it. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. So I can say this today freely because I made that decision. I make it every day. To me, this third step is God's playpen. If you have a child and you put your child in the playpen, you don't put him in there because you don't like him. And you don't put him in there with a whole lot of razors and scissors and knives and whatnot. You put everything in the playpen that's going to make him comfortable. And sometimes that little rascal will cry and want to climb out of there anyhow. And that's me. You see, when I accept the third step, when I take the third step, when I try to practice the third step, I realize within the confines of God's will that there is everything in there for me. And not only that, it is a step of freedom. It frees me. I am free. I am free from all of those stupid, foolish promises. I don't have to wait to see how another person feels about what I'm going to do, because the step merely says, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. It didn't say anything about Charlie. It didn't say anything about Mary. Now, why in the devil I got to wait and see how Charlie feels about me turning my will and my... Well, I don't know whether I ought to go to meeting tonight, because Charlie may not... The hell with Charlie, Charlie never puked for me, So it is simply, this is a decision between God and me. The freedom. See, this step gives me a freedom that alcohol never gave me. See, when I get down on my knees now, I can get up. But many times, alcohol knocked me down on my knees and said, I dare you. Get up. Don't you dare try it. Did you ever get up on one knee and the other and fell out from under you, and you keep trying and you keep falling in things that come up out of your mouth, and you fall and you finally have to lay there in it. That's unhealthy. Really. Very unhealthy. And then this child had to use the muscle of integrity. He had to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of himself. And that calls for, shall we say, utter sincerity. Alcohol has a way of bringing out in me all the viciousness, all the cowardice, all the meanness. It would bring it out. All the arrogance. Now comes the time of disrobing. You know, when the world was still fresh from the hands of Almighty God, there were two people that were created, and due to their disobedience, they found out that they were naked. And they built themselves a garment out of fig leaves. The book tells me they said they were naked. Naked. Not nude, but naked. See, there's a difference between being naked and being nude. When one is nude, he has no clothes on. When one is naked, he's not only does he have any clothes, he's defenseless. And that's how alcohol rendered me defenseless. And I, too, had to build a garment out of fig leaves. The first fig leaf I used was one of pride. And then there was fear. Yeah. And then there was resentment. And then there was hate. And there was distrust. Each one on top of the other one. And when I tried to use the muscle of integrity, utter sincerity, I found out that in God's presence, I can disrobe, say. And like those two people that found themselves naked and built themselves a garment of fig leaves, God made them a garment out of goat skin. God made me a garment, say, out of trust, out of love, out of sincerity. You know, all I had to do was put it on. But first, I had to disrobe. Utter sincerity. Many times we don't want to take an inventory because we feel like, oh, well, you know, I'm sober and I'm not drinking. You had it right. I mean, not drinking, you're not sober. No. And because I don't want to be disturbed. And if I take an inventory, it'll disturb me. It's going to disturb everybody else if you don't take one. You know what I mean? So, you know. And I don't want to be disturbed because disturbance causes pain. Well, if you get a splinter in your finger, you're going to have to disturb the finger there a little bit to get that splinter out. Because it isn't going to do any good to put a Band-Aid on it with the splinter still in it, is it? So, you know, to me, to try to live this life without taking a searching and fearless moral inventory, it's just like taking a bath with all your clothes on. You're just all wet and you still smell bad, you know. It's still one of the same kind of things, you know. And this child had to realize on his road to recovery, as he would exercise these muscles, that he had to look back and take this kind of inventory of himself, a searching and fearless moral inventory of himself, like we take one of ourselves, you know. See, the big book tells me that drinking is just a symptom of what's wrong with me, so I need to take an inventory, you know, whether I want to be disturbed or not, so I won't disturb other people. I don't know of anything in the world that I resented doing as badly as I did taking an inventory the first time, you know. But I have learned it now. Oh, I took one the first time, and I wrote down everything anybody ever did to me, you know, starting back with my grandfather's grandfather as far as that's concerned. But finally, you know, I discovered a word there that said a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, of me. Utter sincerity, you know. It didn't tell me that I had to write an obituary, you know, sometimes. Well, oh, I wrote my inventory, that's over with. Well, that's an obituary if you're not going to write any more, you know, that's obituary, you know. Or you write down all the beautiful things, that's an autobiography, you know. But I had to write down an inventory about Holly. Utter sincerity. And then this youngster realized that he had to take, shall we say, use the muscle of courage. Now, that's a tough titty, but you need the milk. To admit to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. You know? Courage. You know? How could I have done these things? Well, how could you? You're a human being, aren't you? The book says you're a human being, you know. But one time I read about, in England, a strange vegetation that manifested itself, that grew up after it had been bombed for so long. And geologists, archaeologists, or whatever you call these people that meddle around in the mud and dirt and rocks and things, they studied this strange vegetation, and it had been something that had not grown in over several thousand years. But due to the terrific amount of bombing, this vegetation had come back again, you know. And hence it was with me. If you'd been bombed as much as I'd been bombed, you'd have some strange vegetation too, you know, one of those things. And hence it was, this youngster, it took courage. It took courage for him to go down there each and every day. It took courage to say that I must walk again. See? The sickest mind on earth is one that is sick, knows he's sick, and capitalizes on being sick. That is really a sick mind, because I started giving myself all the excuses in the world why it wasn't necessary for me to take the fifth step. All the excuses. Like this youngster, he might have used his illness sometimes, you know, and enjoyed using his illness. And many times I realized that I enjoyed using my illness just to make others jump. You know, queen there, you know. I'm sick, and these people got to do what I want them to do. You know, I am really and truly glad that I did not find out that alcoholism was an illness until I came into this fellowship. Honey, I've been out there capitalizing like hell on it right now, telling you, I got to have, you know, if you don't give me that, I'm going to get sick, you know. But I learned how to grow up. So when people tell you, if you don't give me that, I'm going to get sick, so tell them, let them die, I got your insurance paid, go ahead on, sick as you want to get, you know, because it's got to work for you. So it took courage, and he used this muscle of courage. I suppose that there are many times when he would be down in this flower garden, see, he had to admit that I prolonged my illness to get attention. I'm sure this youngster that went in that wheelchair did that. I had to admit that there's many times, if I thought that you might be able to help me, I didn't want to hear about it because it might work. See, but I wanted you to think that it would work, that I wanted it to. No, I just wanted to get your attention, that's all. Yeah. And I found I wasn't nobody paying a damn bit of attention to me, you know, and they didn't care how sick I got. And I couldn't worry people any longer. You know, many times we think when we look at the fifth step where we admit to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, that it's always got to be some real hideous thing. But do you know that loneliness has caused more crime than poverty ever dreamed of? Sometimes the exact nature of our wrong. There's an S on there. Not the exact nature of my wrong, but the exact nature of my wrongs. There's a big S on the end of it. It was caused through loneliness. Loneliness has caused more crime than poverty ever dreamed of, believe it. There are many situations that you and I got into. And we like to say, oh, I was a big shot, I did such and such a thing, you know, I was such a Theta Bear, you know, a John Wayne or somebody like that. You were lonely as hell, that was what was wrong with you. You weren't down there because you was turning everybody on. You were down there because you had got turned off everywhere else you went, because people turned you off and out too. And the exact nature of my wrongs was loneliness. You know, how I wanted to belong, but I screwed up everything I ever belonged to. And sometimes, you know, we'd also like to think, you know, that, oh, we look so, shall we say, dramatic being alone, and your heart was just bleeding like no heart on earth could bleed. Oh, the acts that we put on. See, when it come down to the fourth and fifth steps, I could have wrote down 2 words, phony, phony. That would have taken care of the whole situation, you know. This is phony as a lead bill, a dollar bill, you'd better believe it. And then, you know, my friends, after taking the fifth step, this child realized something else, that he had to be entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So he had to use the muscle of self-respect. Sure, I imagine many times during his illness that he might have been incompetent in many things that other people had to clean up behind him and all that sort of thing. And he now wanted his self-respect back. And he had to be entirely willing to have God, ready to have God remove all these defects of character. You know, we oftentimes think that it is the big things, Great big things. And it is not always the great big things. Do you know, it is the little bitty things that can steal one's self-respect, such as begging and conning and using other people. Have you ever been around people, you know, you can be talking about the weather, China, or anything else, and you open your wallet and they see more than one $5 bill and then they got to borrow it? Say. Have you ever been around the type of person that he always just left his cigarettes in his room or in his car or someplace or other? Say. Always using people, you know, entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. They do not have to be great big things. They can be those little bitty things. See, I have to watch these little bitty things because this takes in that seventh step where it takes patience. I have to look at what another book tells me and puts it in this book. Beware of the little foxes that gnaw at your vineyards, because your vines have tender grapes. The little foxes, the little bitty things. You see, if you're walking down the street and you see a big elephant coming down the street, you can sidestep. But okay, a gnat can get in there and he can start, what do you call them other things that buzz around your ears? A mosquito, he can buzz cousin of mine, and run you crazy in hell, you know. Little bitty things. You can get out of the way of an elephant, but a mosquito can run you crazy. You get up on the couch and hit at him, and your heel will go through the fabric on the couch, and you knock over 2-3 lamps, and then you raise more hell than a one-legged man at a dance, you know? One of those kind of things. But an elephant, you just sidestep him, one of those things. Beware of the little foxes that gnaw at our vineyards because our vines have tender grapes. It is those little bitty things. And our vines certainly have tender grapes. Mine does, because we are overly sensitive. I am an overly sensitive person. Yeah? Little bitty foxes. I have to watch that little anger. So I just got that little anger. Because, you know, the bottom line is going to be rage when I get through with it. I've got to watch that little resentment. Because the bottom line is going to be revenge. I'm going to get even with you whether you did anything to me or not. You know? I have to watch that. I have to beware of those little foxes. That little argument, that night when I went to bed, and I just didn't say good night to you that night. Well, hell, you know, I'm a little pissed off, so I ain't going to say good night tonight, you know. I have to watch that. Those little bitty things. And hence it is entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. You know, sometimes you want to hold on. If I can just hold on to one of them, everything will be cool. But, you know, after all, I've got to hold on to this. I can't let people run over me. All right, if I say I can't let, what am I holding on? Fear, pride, and all that kind of stuff? I don't have time for that. It's little bitty foxes. And you see, my vines are so tender that the grapes will start fermenting in a minute, and I'll be right back on that wine again. So I have to watch that, you know. Then I had to use, like that youngster, I had to use the muscle of patience. Humbly ask him to remove those shortcomings, those little bitty things, that detonator that sets off the bomb. Humbly ask him to do it, to remove it. Humbly. That word sometimes kind of gets next to me. You know, because we right away, like this sick child, he kept going down into the garden each and every day. But there's a great possibility that he might have felt, why did this have to happen to me? And sometimes, you know, we might feel the same way. Sometimes we even down get angry with God because we feel that I'm not getting well as quickly as I want to. I asked God for this and I didn't get it. Oh, you got an answer. Did you ever get the divine snub? You're not ready for it yet, my man. That's exactly what you got it. Yeah. So, and then there was amends. He realized that he was going to have to use the muscle of amends. He was going to have to make some amends for what he had done. Because quite often during his illness, he might have been a very irritable youngster, as most of us are when we are ill. And he had to learn first that I must forgive myself before I can ask anyone else. But sometimes we want to hold on. We don't want to make amends. We want to get a grudge and hold on until hell freezes over. Just hold on. You know, it's just like the monkey, you know, when he stuck his hand down there in the jug, in the vase there, to get some peanuts out. He got his hand down in there, and he had about 5 peanuts in that jug. And when he doubled up his fist, he couldn't get it out, yeah? And he would not let go of the peanuts. He kept holding them and holding them. And every time he tried to get his hand out of the jug, his fist would rope. Why? He got 5 peanuts. His other friends, other monkeys, is running through the trees, eating pineapples and bananas, and this fool sitting there holding on to 5 peanuts, you know? And sometimes that happens. You and I'll sit there and hold on to 5 little lousy peanuts. Hold on to so long, all the salt's gone off of them. But rather than to be free, and yet, when it comes down to making amends, becoming willing to make amends, making direct amends, and will have the unmitigated nerve to stand up and say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. If God would ever forgive me the way I forgive some people, I'd have disintegrated years ago. You know? But we will stand up and pray that. I have to watch that. And then the youngster, he wanted to use and had to use, after he had learned to walk, he had to use the muscle of preservation. Continue to exercise. That's what he had to do. Like I have to continue to take a personal inventory. I must continue to do this. Now, I'm sure at no time did he ever, when he could walk again, go back and sit down in a wheelchair just to see how it felt to sit in there. Like sometimes we say, well, you know, I'm going down to the bar to see who's in there. I'm just going by. I'm not going to buy nothing. I'm not going to drink. I'm just going to, did anybody send for you? No. So I'm just going by there, you know. I'm going by there to see who's in there. They don't want to see you. You know, going down there to see, you know. So that's it. You see, it's what's going on in your mind. It's like the man, you know, he was sitting at the bar one night, and he saw this lovely girl sitting there, you know, and he kept watching her and watching her, you know. It's always what's going on back in here, why you're thinking this. And he said, kept looking, the bartender says, that's not for you. No need of looking at her. He said, man, I'm not studying that woman. Here, give me another piece of beer. But he wasn't studying her. What was going on in his mind in the first place, you know? So it is not an inventory I continue to take an inventory of what others have done to me, but I must continue to take a personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, promptly admit it. This child knew that I cannot go back and do the things that I did and continue to stay sober. Many times we might say, yeah, I did such and such a thing, and it didn't bother me, I'm still sober. Well, were you sober in the first place if you did it? How could you have been sober and have done that? You know? See, sometimes we get drunk before we take that first drink. I would have to be drunk, mentally drunk, before I could reach and take that first drink. For me to reach out and take that first drink would be to spit in the face of Almighty God. After all the beautiful things that he has given me in my life, to throw a gift back. See, I couldn't do that, my friends. Not today, I couldn't do that. And I'm only asked to hold on to that gift just for today. Preservation. So I am exercising the muscle today by trying to share with you. And then this youngster realized that he must use the muscle of gratitude. And that, my friends, is one of the greatest muscles of all, is the muscle of gratitude. Many times we feel that we don't have anything to be grateful for. But I must remember that man's adversity is God's opportunity. There are many times things happen to me, and I wonder why. I'm no different from anybody else. Why shouldn't they happen to me? Nobody promised me a bed of roses. Sometimes, you know, when we get a little ill, we feel, after the good, beautiful life that I've lived, and I am stricken with this. So what? You struck yourself before this, as far as that goes. See? Many times, it's but the touch of the shepherd's crook. You know, when the shepherd takes his sheep out each day in the pasture for them to graze, and when they come in the evening into the fold, the old shepherd sits there with his crook. And if he finds a burr or a scratch or a mark on one of the little sheep, or a red eye on one of the little sheep, he takes his crook and he touches the little sheep for him to step out of line so he can administer to him. And the rest of them go in the fold. And what does the little sheep do after the shepherd has administered to him? He comes and he lays his head on the shepherd's knee out of gratitude. He can't talk. He can't tell the shepherd thank you, but he can show his thanks. And here you and I who can talk and walk and have every beautiful thing that God gives us. Do you mean to tell me that a sheep has more sense than I have? That he can lay his head on the shepherd's knee out of gratitude. And I can't even get down on my knees at night and say, thank you, God, for whatever the situation was. Thank you for it. Because I have grown from this situation. You know, sometimes the touch of the shepherd's crook reminds me of the 23rd Psalm. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Many times he has to knocketh me down in green pastures. And that's enough to lay down, you know. It has to happen like that. And then this youngster realized that after he had learned to walk again, he must use the muscle of usefulness. That is our 12th step. The muscle of usefulness, carrying the message to the alcoholic that still suffers, and practicing these principles in all our affairs. Not just around the AA table, not to drive somebody all the way to AA, you know, and then you get there, you don't talk to your husband or wife all the way there, and you get to AA around the table, you got more mouth than you can shake a stick at, you talk your ass off, but you can't talk coming and going, you know, one of those. It says to practice these principles in all our affairs. It don't mean the kind of affairs you thinking about, you know, but the affair, the main affair, you know. And you know, it has been such a beautiful weekend practicing these principles with all of our affairs, you know, with our Al-Anons. Because, you know, I love my Al-Anon brothers and sisters, because to me, an Al-Anon is only an alcoholic turned wrong side out. Where's that difference? You know? Yeah. And they're just such beautiful, sweet people, and I love every one of them, you know, really. But this youngster realized that he had to use the muscle of usefulness. You see, my friends, a plastic spoon is useful. But after we use it, many times we throw it away. But a silver spoon is not only useful, it is valuable. And that is what my master requires of me, that I be of value to him. And when I am of value to him, I'm of service to my fellow man. And this is what is so important to you and I when we practice these principles in all our affairs. When one tries to practice these principles in all of our affairs, he will get up out of that emotional wheelchair of mental and physical and spiritual illness. And as the book of books tells us, he will mount up as with wings of an eagle. And he'll run and not be weary, and he'll walk and not faint. God bless you.